Hey everybody. So before I begin, I wanted to say this in either in the early part of my last video or the end part, and I didn't get to because I was so distracted by my daughter that day. But I wanted to thank the few people that within like the past, I want to say month and a half or so, the people that have asked me to like do collabs or videos or live streams or whatever with them. I do appreciate it. Whether it's you see value in what it is that I'm saying or not. Just the idea of even asking me, I do appreciate it. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do stuff like that again. But the times that I've done it in the past, like I tell each and every one of you, and I'll just say it here, it's always bitten me in the ass. People who follow me know that already. It tends to work in other people's favor and not mine. So I think for now I'm just gonna kind of like, stay away from those things. They tend to cause a lot of drama. And I noticed that people like to really flip and manipulate things that people say a lot. So, and that happens to me quite frequently on here, even though I think I do my best and I think I do a pretty good job at making myself very clear. But people like to pick and start fights, and I just don't want it right now. I really don't. Not in this point. Things are going too well for me in my life right now. I'm in like a really happy and zen and content place. So I just don't want no part of drama right now. But anyway, again, thank you to the people who asked. I really do appreciate it. So this is the article that I was talking about in my last video with regards to the boomers. I'm gonna kind of bounce into different things in this video. I'm going to briefly touch on two other articles that one is sort of related to this because it's going to be talking about my generation, Generation X, and the other one is not going to be related to this at all. Okay? But I'm hoping that what it is that I get into, I'm going to make this all kind of make sense. So let me just go and stop rambling. And so basically, are baby boomers a generation of sociopaths? So we have these five elderly white people here in the cover, which look kind of on the funny side, right? Especially once you hear the name of the article. So, long before millennials were dubbed the Me Generation, journalist Tom Wolfe used the label to describe the young baby boomers coming of age in the mid-1970s, a time of heightened focus on the self and personal development. The new alchemical dream is changing one's personality, remaking, remodeling, elevating, and polishing one's very self and observing, studying, and doing, and doting on it. Wolfe wrote in a 1976 New York Magazine cover story. To the extent that millennials really are self-absorbed and narcissistic, just hopefully the people who are millennials, you're listening to this, don't take this too personally. I didn't write this article, and I'm not trying to imply that all of you guys are narcissistic, all right? It may be because they learned from their masters, their parents. Baby boomers, the unusually large generation born during a wave after World War II, grew up in a time of historic prosperity. In many ways, the world they'll leave for their children couldn't be more different from the one they knew as children. Boomers blew through resources, racked up debt, and brought an end to economic growth, using their enormous voting power to elect politicians who enacted policies that typically benefited boomers' interests rather than future generations. Ouch. Now millennials face more debt, fewer resources, and higher levels of unemployment than their parents, and are likely to see the fallout of runaway environmental destruction within their lifetimes. That's sad. And, before I continue, I'm also not trying to bash all. I feel like I keep saying this, and I shouldn't be saying this, because when people talk about Puerto Ricans, New Yorkers on here, and when they speak about us in a negative light, nobody says not all. People just generalize and make the snap judgment, and nobody gives a fuck, and nobody corrects them. So, but, here I am trying to, make exceptions. Anyway, In his new book, A Generation of Sociopaths, writer and venture capitalist Bruce Gibney puts forth the controversial hypothesis that baby boomers, specifically the large subset of white middle-class boomers, are both individually and as a group unusually sociopathic. Gibney cites mental health data showing boomers have significantly higher levels of antisocial traits and behaviors, including lack of empathy, disregard for others, egotism, and impulsivity, than other generations. As a result, boomers have used their substantial voting power to create a society and government that don't work very well. Or, as Gibney puts it, boomers' private behaviors congealed into a debased neoliberalism. The factual basis for Gibney's case is imperfect. Data on generations prior to boomers is thin, because widespread psychological testing wasn't as common, and younger generations haven't been around long enough for long-term data. It's possible that other generations have major issues as well, of course. I would include Gen Xers, because we were also raised by the boomers, so guarantee we got issues. Hey, I ain't saying I'm perfect. It's possible that other generations have major issues as well, but we simply don't have enough information to assess them properly. Gibney, however, insists that there's something unique with boomers. We sat down with Gibney, a Gen Xer, to learn more about why he says boomers are a generation of sociopaths and how the boomer agenda has gotten us into the precarious political and economic situation we're in today. I imagine that a lot of people have taken issue with the title of your book. Is it really possible to apply a psychological label to an entire generation? Well, I think you can match the behaviors and the policies to certain diagnostic criteria. For the boomers, the youngest are in their 50s and the oldest are in their 70s. We have a coherent body of data collected over decades that map onto this diagnostic criteria of sociopathy. So we can see sociopathy associated traits like improvidence. There is no greater improvidence than failing to save for your retirement. Ugh. We can postulate the checklist that way. We have an enormous amount of data about the boomer mainstream, and it matches up surprisingly well with the description of antisocial personality disorder. It's a good diagnostic label because what we're really dealing with is an antisocial society, and that highlights the inherent paradox. Can you have an antisocial society? I don't actually think you can. You argue that boomers aren't genetically predisposed to be dysfunctional, but instead were conditioned to be that way. What do you mean by that? I focus mainly on the white middle-class boomers who constitute the substantial majority of the boom. I had mentioned this in my last video, so this was the article that I was referring to, by the way. And basically that's the reason why the focus was on white boomers, and that it's, when I was doing my research, I had a harder time finding stuff on Latin boomers and like Black American boomers when it comes to personality. Now, I found stuff on them, but it had nothing to do with their personality. But if any of you guys do find stuff on personality traits, disorders, or whatnot with Latin boomers or whatever, you can please let me know. You can leave it in my comment section, and I'll check it out. It's a pretty homogenous group, and they were raised in a fairly homogenous way. They were the first generation in the U.S. to be raised permissively, and the evidence strongly suggests that highly permissive parenting leads to some problems later on in life. These people have a higher self-esteem, but they tend to be more rebellious and messy, both in the literal sense and in their approach to their own affairs. They were also the first generation to be raised with television, and there really weren't parental reservations about screen time. The literature on TV and cognitive and behavioral development is almost universally negative. And finally, there are certain assumptions that are built up throughout their early years. For the first half of the boomers particularly, they came of age in a time of fairly effortless prosperity, and they were conditioned to think that everything gets better each year without any real effort. So they really just assume that things are going to work out no matter what. That's unhelpful conditioning. You have 25 years where everything just seems to be getting better, so you tend to not try as hard, and you have much greater expectations about what society can do for you and what it owes you. So what's been the fallout of that in terms of policy and economics? There's obviously been a substantial declaration of economic growth. The Great Recession arguably began in 2001, and we've never entirely recovered, so there's 16 years of lost opportunity. The second big thing on the economic front is the intergenerational passing of burdens, and the most salient one is the debt. Gross debt to GDP 40 years ago was 34%, and today it's around 105%. Jesus. It's projected by the Congressional Budget Office to exceed the World War II highs by the early 2030s. When boomers start taking control and influencing policies, the policies get worse on the debt. So that now we haven't seen these levels of debt in more than 70 years. Jesus Christ. There are consequences to these levels of debt, but that's not really relevant for the boomers. This is not their problem, and they have not been serious about it. The debt wasn't discussed as a serious issue during the 2016 presidential election, but Social Security was, because this is what stood out to me the most in this whole thing. This right here, what I'm about to read, stood out to me the most, because we know that this program is going to be partially insolvent by 2034. That's like around the corner. And this is the only thing that Trump and Clinton could agree on. Social Security, untouchable. Medicare, untouchable. These things are sacred. They couldn't even agree on where to stand on the stage together, and they agreed on Social Security. So two very opposing political forces agreed heavily on Social Security. To the point where everything else can be dealt with, but not that. And the thing is that both people come from the same generation. So that was the reason why they pointed this out. And I'm not trying to say that's, that there shouldn't be any, like that Social Security isn't important for of course it is, right? But the fact that everything else could be like dealt with, but not that. Like nobody touches those things like that. Like that's sacred. And basically, there's not going to be any of that in the future for the rest of us, right? But the boomers must have done some good things, right? Toward the end of the book, there's a chapter called The Myth of Boomer Goodness. Some of the pushback I've gotten on the book is people saying, well, didn't boomers do all these wonderful things like fighting for civil rights? I was one of those people, and I still, to a degree, I still am one of those people that was always like, that they really fought for that, that they, that we do have to give them credit for that, but listen to what I'm about to say. But there's no way that chronology works out. The Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act were 1964 and 1965, and only the very oldest boomers could have voted for the congressman who pushed through that act. So they played no part in those foundational victories. What we have seen instead is the Voting Rights Act gutted. And that says a lot. That also made me think a lot. Like when I read that, I was like, wow. Because, I thought about, when I learned about the civil rights movement and all of the leaders back at that time. And it's like, like I questioned that when I read it. I was like, wow, I would really have to go and like research like all of these people's ages, when did they start, when did they finish, what year would they start, you know what I mean? And just the idea of that, like, wow, that there's an impact that we thought was there, it actually wasn't, according to this article. Or you can take the environment, which is going to affect everybody. This has just not been a serious item for the boomers. They can't take credit for these enormous civil rights and environmental victories that we saw in the 60s and the early 70s. Are boomers responsible for the rise of Trump? Well, he is a boomer, and the leading candidates in the primaries were all boomers. Who's responsible for the rise of Donald Trump? We could slice and dice the exit polls, or we can blame the FBI or Putin. But what I think is really remarkable is that he was ever considered a viable candidate at all. Only after years of disappointment, economically and otherwise, could a Manhattan Bulgarian with no prior experience emerge as a candidate for the highest office in the United States. So older white groups were the most enthusiastic about Trump, but there had to first be the conditions that allowed him to even be plausible. And so that's it. That's the end of the article. I'm not going to get into this whole, Trump stuff. And, I know that there's a few people that watch me that are, heavy Trump supporters. So I'm not going to start talking about Trump in this, right? The article is not about him. I'm not saying I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm not I'm just not gonna get into that. So, I thought that this was really interesting. I found this article too. I found a few. And this one is The Forgotten Generation. Let's talk about Generation X. And it just kind of, this is from Forbes. And it just kind of talks about like, our contributions to society and just basically how we've been forgotten about. That all you would hear about is the boomers, and then after you heard about the boomers, all you hear about is millennials. So I thought that this article is a good read, so I'm going to just leave it. I'm not going to read it. I'll just leave it in the description box if you care to even look at it. Now this, what I'm about to read, or I'm just going to talk about it briefly. Excuse me. Take the word read out of it. Is this article, which some people are going to be like, this has nothing to do with anything that I'm talking about. And no, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. But this was brought to my attention by Elon Jones. So shout out to Elon Jones. And it was an attack in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And it was NYC man faces 52 count indictment on 7 attacks on light-skinned women. And the thing that really stood out to me is the fact that at least they went out of their way and they called it for what it is and what the attack was about, right? And the fact that it was specified here. Because when things have been happening like this in the past, when light-skinned women were targeted in the past, nobody gave a crap. And it was never considered like any type of hate crime, right? Back in the day, girls used to get their faces slashed. And this was all in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and these are my old stomping grounds. This is my old area. Even though this area where it's happened, I believe this was in Morgan. You have like Morgan Avenue station, right? So the Morgan Avenue station, I mean, I know there's some people from New York City, there's some people not. On the L line, Morgan, Montrose, Bedford Avenue, those are all like very gentrified, pretty pricey areas in Brooklyn, all right? I didn't live there. I would occasionally go hang out there with friends when I was, in my younger years. Because I was into like that whole hipster type thing. I was a little bit of a hipster myself, sort of, back in the day. But it really stood out to me because, a lot of these people were also, if you read the article, they were also Latin women. So it's like he targeted light-skinned black women. It seems as though some of the culprits were white women, and that some of the culprits were Latin women. And it's just a shame that like we've had in the past, we've had channels like light skin channels that would talk about stuff like this. And just the fact that finally like it's finally in mainstream media that this has been labeled what it is, as and basically this is considered a hate crime. And now there's people that of course there's going to be people trying to argue that this is not a hate crime, but it is a hate crime. This dude like went out of his way, and like there's video footage of him beating the crap out of this young woman. I'm trying to like rewind it back to the beginning of the article, but it doesn't look like it's gonna let me. So it doesn't look like it's gonna let me, but I'll leave it in the description box. And I feel like I'm kind of throwing this into like the boomer stuff. This is like, it has nothing to do with it, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. And I really didn't want to like make it its own video because like I said, somebody else already made it an entire video. But I just kind of wanted to quickly give my thoughts on it. So I just figured I would just put it in this video. And, I like I was gonna get into like the Latin unity stuff in this video, but I think I'm not going to. I think I'm just gonna leave that for another video, because I know that I went from Latin unity, and then I kind of spoke about the boomers, what it was like growing up with boomer parents and just basically growing up around that generation. And then I kind of got into the article, and I haven't gotten back into the whole Latin unity deal. So I'll get back on that. I might do like 1 or 2 more videos on it. But I don't think I'm going to stay on it really long, because I think my opinions are they're just my opinions. So, you know, what I believe is not what necessarily everybody else is going to believe. And yeah, I think with that, I'm going to go for now. Definitely check this article out, this one. And of course, you know, for those of you that follow me who, you know, still talk about light skin issues and whatnot in their content, please check out that article, because I thought it's, you know, I definitely think it's worth checking out. And I definitely think it's a shame that that this guy, that dude, you know, whoever was going around doing it, that piece of crap. I believe in the article it says, let me just double check. He's 29 years old. So 29 years old, that is a millennial. That's you guys. Don't want to take accountability. What's he gonna say? What's he gonna say about them? What's gonna be the excuse for him? Let's see what excuses people come up with for this guy. Poor guy, he was poor, so then he had to go and just beat the living crap out of light-skinned women just because he felt like it. It doesn't show anything about him like necessarily robbing any of these women. He was just basically beating them, and that's it. You know, some type of mental illness, but it's obviously a mental illness that he has against light-skinned women, because those were his targets. Anyhow, I'm glad he was caught, but I'm gonna go for now, and yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.